Such kind remarks, I appreciate it. Clearly, my mother has your cell phone number. And such kind words about the state. I don't mind actually doing the introduction from you from now on, and you can talk about the state, because you're so positive, which I am as well, and there's lots of things to be positive about. And as they say, you had me from the beginning. You walk in and you see Helena, and she greets you with a great open smile. You know that you're welcome here, and I appreciate all the great work that you do for economic development, for New York City. The only complaint that I have is you've and this is a terrific breakfast. Serving bagels. I didn't see a toaster. Good morning, everyone. I haven't had enough coffee yet, but I appreciate being invited for breakfast. I appreciate the audience, and now I find out that I got to compete with Thursday night cocktails. So, but I'm happy to have this slot this morning. I also just wanted to acknowledge one person from our team who does spend all of his time focusing on New York City, Joe Taswell, who does such a great job. And as Mark said, I am Eric Gertler. I'm the President and CEO of Empire State Development, and I can tell you that I'll tell you a little bit about my background afterwards, but it's a real privilege to be able to be in this position, to serve the governor, and to serve all of you and the people of New York State. So with that, I want to tell you that 2020 promises to be a very busy year for the state. It's barely 2 weeks into the new year, and we've already made a lot of progress, and it's already been an eventful one. And I can tell you that if you take just the first 2 weeks, what's happened in the last 2 weeks for myself, this is my second stint in government, but it makes you proud to be in public service and to be able to serve this governor. So let me just go back to the first week of the new year. Started off on last Sunday, so about 12 days ago, and I had the privilege of joining the governor at Foley Square to march across Brooklyn Bridge and to see his great support and his great words against anti-Semitism. And many of you, and some of you may have been there. Then the next day, proud to be in the audience when the governor at the Albany lunch announced the expansion of Penn Station, the Empire Station complex, a vision for New York City, and a vision about how to think about transportation in the 21st century. 2 days later, since I'm new on the job, it was my first time to go to Albany and listen to the State of the State and hear a grand vision by the governor for the state. Given this was my first time being there for the State of the State, it was his 9th State of the State, and he had lost, no sleep, full energy, focused, visionary, and delivered one of the most remarkable speeches I had ever seen. And then going back earlier on Monday, I was not present when the governor helped to save someone on the BQE. So, he does all of these heroic efforts, and I can tell you that it really, truly is a privilege to work for him and work for the administration. And this morning, it's an honor to work, to be present with all of you. As Mark said, the businesses that you run, what you do as executives and entrepreneurs, fuel this economy, ensure that our state economy and our local economy is moving forward. We understand, I do from my business background, understand what you need to do to build businesses, how hard it is, and that is why one of the approaches the governor has taken is a bottoms-up approach. This idea of making sure that we're listening to what is most important at the local level. And so it's not just a vision for the state, but it's also figuring out the blocking and the tackling that's needed on the local level. And of course, the governor, as do I, we understand that a state economy is critical, and a strong economy in New York City is also critical. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend some time walking through some of the key points of the state of state. I want to give you a sense of what we're thinking about for 2020, what are the proposals and the vision. But if you'll allow me, I'll just give you a few things about my background. Mark was kind enough to talk about a number of the things that I've done, but I've really had the privilege to do a wide-ranging number of things. One of the great privileges was to work with, as Mark pointed out, the New York Daily News. I in fact started my career here in New York City working to help acquire the Daily News in the early 90s. Worked as general counsel and worked in many different roles, and then left, and then a number of years ago came back. In fact, we, as part of the new business model, we work with a number of different businesses, including Mr. Schnapp's in the back of the back. So, how are you? Thank you for coming. I came back as publisher about 5 years ago, and I think I became one of the few people in this country who had the privilege of buying a newspaper and then being part of the group to sell the newspaper. And I think that's a reflection of what's going on in the local newspaper business. I was not as brave as some people in this room who have figured out a new and smart model in local media, but I can assure you that it is critical. It is critical that we have newspapers and local outlets to ensure that we're delivering fair and factual information every day to New Yorkers and, quite frankly, everybody in the country and the world. I also worked as an entrepreneur. I know how tough it is to build businesses from scratch. I can tell you that I had many days, and I'm sure some of you feel this, where I started off the day feeling like I was going to go bankrupt. Sometime in the afternoon, I felt like I was onto $1 billion business. And then I sort of developed, probably at one of these Thursday night cocktails, I sort of became more realistic and sort of realized that it'll be somewhere in the middle. But one of the toughest things to do is to build your own business, and I respect that. And it's one of the important things that we do at ESD to help figure out how you grow your businesses and provide you with the support and the resources that you need. And then as Mark said, I also had the privilege of serving in local government. I started under Mayor Bloomberg, focusing on job growth here in New York City, thinking about how we grow industry, how to think about how industry can be accelerated to help businesses and individuals growing those businesses. So this has been my second stint. And then lastly, before joining the governor, I was executive chairman of U.S. News and World Report, known to many by the rankings that are produced, the best colleges, best hospitals. But what I learned was when you have to rank something, you have to look at those rankings. You have to know why you're ranking them, and if you're not looking at how you can improve, then you're never going to be improving. And when you're being ranked, you're being held accountable. And that has been one of the tenets of my life, is making sure that I remain accountable to the goals that we have, to the people, and to everything that we do. And in those seconds that I forget, we have a governor that makes sure that that we're doing what's important. And then lastly, just one of the stories. Through all these experiences, I've realized that it's critically important to respect and listen. I'm not just here to speak. I'm here to listen to what's going on, to make sure that we're involved. As one of my mentors says, when you go into negotiation, it's critical that you feel as though you're in, your opponent's shoes. In fact, as my mentor said, it's important that you walk a mile in your opponent's shoes. And why? Because if the deal doesn't work out, you've walked a mile away from your opponent and you have issues. So anyway, let's dive into this thing. Thank you. And first thing that I can report is the state of our state is really quite strong. It's been 10 years where we've seen tremendous progress, and as you know, many long-delayed projects, particularly in infrastructure, that never got off the ground, are finally moving forward. And we know that we are doing so at a time when there's great anxiety, there's division, there's stress, particularly at the national level. But in New York State, as Mark said, in the Empire State, we don't let those things stop us. We're sensitive to them, but we want to make sure that we are undertaking real progress and real accomplishments. The Economy and Empire State Development is the agency. It's the state's economic development arm of the state. We're very focused on the economy. We are seeing unprecedented growth. The private sector is at a record of 8.3 million private sector jobs. And at the same time, unemployment is at historic lows. And when you think about what's been happening, this state has seen the most aggressive, the most ambitious infrastructure program in the country. $250 million that have been invested in roads, and bridges, in subways, in mass transit. A series of investments that you are not seeing anywhere in this country. This is bigger than any other state in the nation. And, it's something that the governor is proud of. He does not let projects languish. Projects that have not been touched and only been talked about for decades are now being moved on. And let me just give you, just very quickly, across the state, especially in New York City, rebuilding the Cuomo Bridge on budget and 4 years ahead of schedule, expanding the Javits Center, completing the 2nd Avenue subway, breaking ground on a new home for the Islanders with the Belmont Park in Nassau County, and I know a number of you here are working on that project, and replacing the Tappan Zee Bridge on time and on budget with the Governor Mario Cuomo Bridge, expanding LIRR. The end of this year, in December, we're going to open up the new Moynihan Station. It'll be a train station like none you have ever seen. It will be spectacular. And then, of course, I'll talk about this a little bit later, the plan that the governor announced to expand Penn Station, which we call the Empire Station Complex. Now, at the same time, we talk about all of these infrastructure programs, but progress is being made not just on economic issues, which we know are critical, but also on social issues, which are also important, which also define Empire State. Marriage equality, wage and benefit increases, gun safety, educational improvements, tax relief. Simply a tremendous record of progress for all New Yorkers. On the tax side, every New Yorker now pays a lower tax rate than they did when the governor came to office. Middle-class tax rates are at the lowest in 70 years. Manufacturing tax rate, lowest in a century. Lowest tax rate for corporations in half a century. And in this State of the State, the governor announced that he will continue to lower personal income tax for middle-class New Yorkers. So it'll drop both for the $40,000 to $150,000 bracket, but also for the $150,000 to $300,000 bracket. So that'll save New Yorkers about $1.8 billion this upcoming year. And I might add, this is all being done responsibly. You in the business community, you need to balance your payroll, your businesses every month. We need to do the same. The governor has to be accountable. He's done this 9 times in a row, 9 state budgets on time. You're not postponing your bills. We're not doing the same. We want to be held accountable the same way you got to be held accountable to your employees. And there's lots of things that we can talk about around the state. And I've had the privilege of going around New York State, 10 different regions, lots of amazing things happening around the state. But the state's success is as evident there as it is in New York City. And the strength of the state's economy is evident with a wide variety of measures. If we look at the city, economic output up 46% since 2011. Private sector has added jobs 9 straight years in a row since 2011 here in New York City. We know that the financial services sector remains the anchor in terms of payroll revenue. But we have also seen this city become one of the highest growing, fastest growing tech industries in the nation. 53% increase in tech jobs since 2011. And if you take a measure of venture capital, today New York City is the #2 place for venture capital investment in the country. Silicon Valley remains #1. But that's an incredible set of growth for this city. And that is a product of the close to $82 billion that we as a state have invested in New York City in terms of infrastructure, workforce development, business assistance. New York City region has been awarded through the local process, the REDC program, in which we ensure that we hear what's needed from local executives, business people, university officials on the ground. $616 million over 9 years. A program that has used that to leverage $4.5 billion in other private and public investment. So we're really efficient in terms of making sure that when we invest, we're also investing with partners like yourself, with other entities. So we leverage that money, and here we've leveraged that up to $4.5 billion, which has then led to almost 40,000 jobs. And our measure through our lens, we're making sure we're leveraging that, and our output is making sure that we'll continue to grow. Bless you, by the way. That we'll continue to grow jobs. And this work touches every area of New York City and every area of the economy. I'll just run through Silver Cup Studios, location in the Bronx, which has grown as a partnership. Victoria Theater in Harlem, which we have partnered with to help grow and create construction jobs and full-time jobs. The Howland Hook Marine Terminal on Staten Island, in which we've partnered with and provided grants and helped to increase growth there. The Greenpoint Manufacturing and Design Center's Ozone Park Industrial Hub. And then in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the facility for nanotronics. So thinking about both ways in which we are investing in industries of the future, but also the day-to-day infrastructure and the workforce programs that are needed now to train people so that people are prepared for the future. With that and through these efforts, it's not just the rising employment, it's also figuring out, which we've, I think, done successfully, how have we and worked on also cutting unemployment, which we've done significantly across the state and here in New York City. And that also leads us to think about, when we do this, how are we thinking about the industries of the future, the jobs of the future, and how do we, and I know this is all in your minds too, how do we think about workforce training and ensuring that we're helping individuals today learn the skills that they need for the jobs of tomorrow. I can assure you that this is a governor that does not stop. He is never happy with the status quo, and he continues to work on and push an aggressive agenda for the state and for New York City. And this is, and let's face it, there are a lot of issues that we're facing on a macro level. There are macroeconomic issues. There are climate issues. There's the issue of the SALT deductibility issue. So these are major macro issues that we recognize, but we can't sit around and do nothing. We've got to continue to move forward and build this economy. So, with that, one of the issues is climate change. Hurricane Sandy was certainly a wake-up call. Interestingly for me, that was a time where I felt that it was important that I go to Staten Island. I went house by house. I helped people on New Dorp Lane, helped to take out some of the, their clothes that got wet. I remember going to the door and going up to the house and I said, "Could I help?" And the person looked at me, do what? I go, do whatever you want me to do. And I spent the day clearing out. It was really sad. All these books that were wet for their children. I mean, these were people whose lives were significantly impacted. And as the governor likes to say, he keeps on being told that these types of storms are storms that are just once a century. And these once-a-century storms are becoming once a year, whether it's in New York City or upstate, and we need to prepare. We need to recognize that climate change is one of the great macro changes. It's an existential threat to what we face, and we need to figure out how to tackle that, and that is part of the work that we continue to do. At the same time, given the uncertainty in Washington, one of the things that we announced was to do a $3 billion Restore Mother Nature Bond Act. This money will be used, it will be raised to help invest in those projects to ensure that we are creating the resiliency efforts that we need to shore up communities and neighborhoods, certainly here in New York City and across the five boroughs. As part of this, we've also ensured that we've created a multi-pronged program to support first responders and maintain the state at the level that we want. These are individuals that are working so hard, and we want to make sure that they, when they're called to action, that they have all the resources that they need, because again, these are individuals who are giving their time, their efforts, their heart, their lives to making sure that we and the state remain safe. And again, this is not like 40 years ago. They are getting called on more and more often to address some of these storms. At the same time, we each have a personal responsibility to turn the tide. We can all do our own work. Last year, the governor banned one of the prevalent acts of pollution, plastic bags. This year, we're also looking to ban styrofoam. Very different here in the city than upstate, but the ban is on single-use styrofoam. And in the same case, as we think about climate change, an investment and focus on greenhouse emissions, and one way to do it is to be aggressively promoting the electric vehicle industry, and we're going to start to figure out and implement ways to allow green energy, electric vehicles to grow in New York. So we also focused on the business environment. I talked a little bit about some of the taxes. Certainly, taxes for middle class will continue to go down. We look for ways, and the governor looks for ways to provide tax relief, because we know that's a critical equation in terms of how you can and must lead your day-to-day lives. Cutting taxes for the middle-class New Yorkers and small businesses, we figure, will benefit 1.5 million taxpayers in the 5 boroughs. So that's a pretty significant part of the population, and that includes supporting small corporate taxpayers. So in every situation, we're trying to be very pragmatic and figuring out how do we make your life easier every single day. And this, of course, and we think about this every day, this is against the backdrop that tax and offsets in New York State changed very dramatically when Washington, and we believe, made a disastrous decision to eliminate the SALT deduction, the state and local tax deduction, which we view as an assault on the state. It costs the state $15 billion annually. We are now the number one, indisputably, the number one donor state to the rest of the country in terms of the money that we send back to Washington that then gets distributed around the country. And that's an issue that we are working on with our congressional delegation. Again, all focused for how do we ensure that we continue to improve New York State. As well, from a tax standpoint, we will seek to expand the Empire Child Tax Credit, which helps about 250,000 working families across the 5 boroughs. And as well, We recognize that the economy continues to change. It continues to change in many different characteristics as we become an industry that's fueled by, in different ways, by technology. We need to ensure that we are thinking about and protecting those in the gig economy. Certainly those types of workers have grown tremendously in the last 10 years, and we just need to make sure that they, as well as they do their work, that they get to share in the successes of this economy. And look, the reality is, and when I worked for the city, I spent a lot of time thinking about and talking about the fact that we have gone to a more complicated economy. I know all of you think about how is technology affecting your business. More and more, we see more people enter, what we call sort of the knowledge economy. And it's interesting. I used to give a speech many years ago about how when the internet came about, it meant that you could live and work anywhere. But the reality is that with technology and with the advent of sort of the knowledge that's required, people actually want to work closer together. And people are coming back to cities. We're seeing this in New York City. We're seeing this upstate with all the downtown revitalization initiatives that we're doing. And people not only want to be in cities, they want to be in shared workspaces together. So we see that, and one of the answers is to make sure that what was needed 50 years ago is a high school diploma. What is needed even more now is a college degree, and we want to make that easier for New Yorkers. And so in doing so, we've also raised the eligibility threshold for the Excelsior Scholarship. We've raised it from $125,000. You're eligible now at $150,000. And this opens the door for more than 121,000 New York City residents to go to college, tuition free. As well, this has been in the news a lot. The agenda includes a responsible and reasonable way to legalize cannabis. We've announced the creation of a new Office of Cannabis Management to ensure that we are thinking about it appropriately for medical, adult, and home use, and it's done in a way that is smart, reasonable, and protects the public. As well, building on our efforts from last year, increasing progressive measures to ensure that we're opening the doors so that New Yorkers who have not been able to can fully participate in our society. And with that, we focus on legalizing gestational surrogacy and helping LGBTQ couples and other couples struggling with infertility. It's done in many other states around the country. It should also be supported in the Empire State. And as you can see, you can look at all of these programs. Simply, we've advanced the strongest and most dramatic agenda for women in this country that any state has supported. To name a few, we will pass the first in the nation inclusive Equal Rights Amendment, create a Women's Corporate Leadership Academy, improve representation for women on corporate boards, and enhance programs that support and protect victims of domestic violence. As the governor's done in so many areas, it's important to ensure that our agenda, our social agenda, is the most aggressive agenda, and of course that means simply women should be supported in all of these programs. Well, I've talked about cannabis. I got to talk about people. A century ago, New York City had a thriving beer industry. Under the governor, and I've been many places upstate, we've seen the craft beer industry flourish again. We've seen breweries in New York City as well starting to flourish. With Finback in Glendale, Brooklyn Brewery, Flagship in Staten Island, and I can go on. And we will continue to support the craft beverage manufacturing by eliminating the barriers and reforming antiquated laws that are preventing this from happening. It's an important industry in New York, and we want to make sure that it can flourish in the state and in New York City. So, as I talked about at the beginning, one of the big, visionary, bold initiatives that the governor announced was how do we think about expanding